This section talks about solving absolute value equations. So first of all, what is absolute value? Absolute value is the distance from 0 to a number. Okay, so absolute value is the distance from 0 to a number. Now, because it's the distance from 0 to a number, distance, it can never be negative. Distance is always positive. Which is why absolute value is always going to be positive. Let's see some examples. Let's do a graphical representation of the absolute value of 6. So the absolute value of 6 is going to be the distance from 0 to 6. Okay, what is the distance from 0 to 6? It's equal to 6. If you start at 0 and you take 6 steps, you're going to get to 6. So because you're taking 6 steps, the distance is going to be 6. So the absolute value of 6 will equal to 6. Okay, what about the absolute value of negative 6? So once again, we're starting at 0, and you want the distance from 0 to negative 6. So this is negative 6 over here. Okay, what is the distance from 0 to negative 6? Well, if you start at 0 and you take 6 steps to go to negative 6, you're still taking 6 steps. So it's not like so if I start and I walk backwards, it's not like I'm taking negative steps, I'm still taking 6 steps. So the distance is going to be positive 6. So the absolute value of negative 6 is also going to be 6. Because distance is always positive, it doesn't matter if you go in the positive or negative direction, the absolute value will always be 6 since it represents the distance. Okay, next problem. We have the absolute value of x equals to 4. What is x equal to? Okay, so let's think about what the question is asking. The question is asking, which number is 4 spaces away from 0? Now, actually, it's not which number, it's which numbers, because there are 2 of them. Okay, if you represent this graphically, if this is 0, then 4 is 4 spaces away from 0. So x equals to 4 is a solution because the absolute value of 4 is 4. But negative 4 is also 4 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4, because all this is asking is which numbers are 4 spaces away from 0. In other words, for which numbers is the distance from 0 to x equal to 4? Well, that's 4 and negative 4, which is why we have 2 solutions. Okay, now we're going to take this and we're going to use that as a basis of solving absolute value equations. So, let's start with our first example. Okay, so our first example says absolute value of 2x minus 11 equals to 7. Okay, now I gave you guys 2 steps to solving absolute value equations. Step 1, isolate the absolute value. It's already isolated. There's nothing on the same side of the absolute value. So step 1 is done. Second step, set the term inside the absolute value equal to a and negative a. And this equals to a. Okay, so let's think about forget those directions. What's happening? This represents a number. Okay? And we know that whatever is in here, the distance from 0 to this number is going to be 7. So that can be 7, that can also be negative 7. Because the absolute value of 7 is 7, the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. Since 2x minus 11 represents whatever is in this absolute value, this can equal to 7, or this can also equal to negative 7. So we're going to say that 2x minus 11 equals to 7, because the absolute value of 7 is 7, so this has to be 7, or 2x minus 11 can also equal to negative 7. Okay? So we set up 2 different equations. Now let's solve these. If you add 11 to each side, we're going to get 2x equals to 18. You divide both sides by 2, and you get x equals 9. Here, we add 11 to each side, so we're going to get 2x equals to 4. If you divide by 2, we're going to get x equals 2. Okay, so let me go through that one more time. 2x minus 11, it just represents a number inside the absolute value. Now, we want that to be equal to 7. So which numbers have an absolute value of 7? 7 and negative 7. So this number, which represents whatever, or with this expression, which represents a number that's inside the absolute value, could either equal to 7 or it could equal to negative 7. It's always best to check our answer, so let's check. Let's plug in 9 and 2. If you plug in 9, you're going to get 2 times 9 minus 11. Absolute value of that. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 minus 11 is equal to 7. The absolute value of 7 is equal to 7. So that checks out. That's good. What about the next one? The next value of x is 2. So if I plug that in, my equation is 2 times x. So now I'm saying x is 2. So I get 2 times 2 minus 11. 2 times 2, that's 4. And then 4 minus 11 is negative 7. The absolute value of negative 7, that's also equal to 7. So that also works. So 9 and 2, what they do is, this value, if you plug it in, makes that expression equal to 7. If you plug in x equals 2, it makes that expression equal to negative 7. And both have an absolute value of 7, which is why these are the solutions to that equation. Okay, so we're looking for numbers that will give this expression a value of 7 and a value of negative 7. Okay, let's do another example. Okay, next example. We have the absolute value of 6x minus 7 minus 5 equals to 18. Okay, step 1. Isolate the absolute value. Always, always, always do that first. If the absolute value has anything on the same side as the absolute value, you can't do anything with that. So we first have to start by adding 5 to each side. Okay, we start by adding 5 to each side. So what happens? We get the absolute value of 6x minus 7 equals to 23. Once it's isolated, once there's nothing else on the same side as the absolute value, we can now continue. Okay, now remember, the 6x minus 7, all it is, it's an expression. It represents different numbers depending on what x is. What do we want this to be? Well, we know that the absolute value of 23 is 23, and the absolute value of negative 23 is also 23. So 6x minus 7, we want to find out for which value of x is this expression equal to 23 and equal to negative 23. That's what we're trying to figure out. Okay, so we're going to say that this expression, 6x minus 7, it has to equal to 23, or it has to equal to negative 23. And you want to figure out which values of x do that. You guys can solve that equation, so I'm not going to do that part. So we get x equals to 5. And here, you have x equals to negative 16 over 6, which is going to be negative 1/3. So these are our two solutions, x equals to 5 and x equals to negative 1/3. These values of x make that expression have a value of 23 and negative 23. Okay, let's do a quick check to be sure that we did this correctly. Okay, first, plug in x equals 5. So we have 6 times 5 minus 7. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 minus 7 is 23. The absolute value of 23 is 23. So 5 works. So notice, x equals 5 gives this expression a value of 23. Okay, now let's plug in x equals to negative 1/3. So you have 6 times negative 1/3 minus 7. Okay, how do you multiply 6 times negative 1/3? Well, 3 goes into 6 twice. So 2 times negative 8, that's negative 16. And negative 16 minus 7, that's negative 23. The absolute value of negative 23 is equal to 23. So when you plug in negative 1/3, that expression has a value of negative 23. Its absolute value is 23, so that works. Okay, so x equals 5, x equals negative 1/3 are your solutions. Okay, next example. We got 18 minus the absolute value of 2x minus 5 equals 13. Okay, first and foremost, we have to isolate the absolute value. So we take the 18 and we're going to subtract it from each side. So this cancels out. Does the negative sign go away? No, it doesn't. It stays where it's at. So it's going to be negative absolute value of 2x minus 5. That's equal to negative 5. We're not quite done. This absolute value is not by itself. It's not isolated. There's still a negative there. So the negative, it's like a negative 1. So we divide by negative 1, and we divide by negative 1. Okay, so this cancels out. We get the absolute value of 2x minus 5 equals to 5. Okay, 2x minus 5, all that is an expression that represents a number. So we want to figure out for which values of x is this expression equal to 5 and negative 5. So we're going to say 2x minus 5 equals to 5, and 2x minus 5 equals to negative 5. Okay, let's solve that. You add 5 to each side, you're going to get 2x equals to 10, which means x equals 5. Here we add 5 to each side, you get 2x equals to 0. Now remember, if you divide by 2, 0 divided by anything, doesn't matter what the number is, it's always going to be 0. So x will equal to 0. Great, these are our two answers. We can't stop there, we have to check. Did we do it correctly? Now to do a check, you go back to the original problem. The original problem says we got 18 minus the absolute value of 2x minus 5, and that's equal to 13. Let's check x equals 5. So I'm replacing this x with a 5. What happens if I do that? I get 18 minus 2 times 5 is 10. And then 10 minus 5 is 5, so we get 18 minus absolute value of 5. What is the absolute value of 5? It's 5. So this gives you 18 minus 5, which is 13. Perfect, that checks out. Let's check the next value of x. Let's check x equal to 0. So if you plug in x equals to 0, it's going to be a 0 there. 2 times 0 is going to be 0. 0 minus 5, that's going to be negative 5. Now you got to be careful. We can't make these two negatives into a positives because it's not a parentheses, it's an absolute value. So this has to be done first. The absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. And 18 minus 5 is 13. So that also checks out. You know what, I apologize. I think in the last one I put a 15 there by accident, but it should have been a 5. So the last check, that should have been a 5, not a 15. But the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, and 18 minus 5, that's equal to 13. So that checks out. Isolate first. Then you can set it equal to a and negative a. Okay, last but not least. So here's what we have. We have 4 times the absolute value of 3x plus 9 plus 6 equals to 102. All right. First step, you want to isolate the absolute value. So to do that, I'm going to start off by subtracting 6 from each side. Okay, so this gives me 4 times the absolute value of 3x plus 9, that's equal to 96. The 4 is being multiplied by 3x plus 9, so we're going to divide everything by 4 and do that, and you get the absolute value of 3x plus 9 is equal to 24. Okay, once this absolute value is isolated, now we can continue. So you want this absolute value, whatever the expression is inside of that, to equal to 24 and negative 24. So you want to find out for which value of x is that expression equal to 24 and equal to negative 24. Okay, so we're going to say that 3x plus 9 equals 24, or 3x plus 9 equals to negative 24. Okay, you want to find the values of x that make this expression equal to 24 or negative 24. Okay, so you guys can solve that. Here, you're going to get x equals 5. And here, you're going to get x equals to negative 11. Okay? Once we have x equals 5, once we have x equals negative 11, we can't stop there. We have to go through and check to make sure this makes sense. So I'm going to set up the check for you, and I want you guys to finish it. So the original problem says this. It says you got 4 times the absolute value of 3x plus 9 plus 6, and you want to check, does that equal to 102? So first, I want you to replace the x with 5. Evaluate that, make sure that the left side equals to 102. Once that happens, change this to negative 11, same thing, evaluate that, make sure it equals to 102. Okay, come to class prepared with questions.